Hello. Today we will be examining a moment of migrant farm worker organizing. You may have heard of Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez's organizing, based here in California in the 1960s. What I'd like to tell you about today is another similar movement that developed in a place that's not often talked about as a hub of Chicane organizing. Taking place in Wisconsin, the Obreros Unidos march from Watoma to Madison shows that farm workers were strategically and effectively mobilizing, not only in places like California, but across the country as well. The Wisconsin movement was intertwined with broader national movements and carefully constructed to gain the support and attention of locals, prompting responses from the state. At the same time as Huerta and Chavez's grape boycott, migrant workers in Wisconsin were facing poor living and working conditions. Jesus Salas, a former migrant worker turned advocate, led a group of marchers to demand four things: higher minimum wage, good benefits, better sanitation facilities, and representation on committees. I will be centering this discussion on a newspaper article published in Madison's newspaper, The Capital Times, called Migrant Workers Set Out on March. It was written by James Marinus on August 15, 1966, during a rally the activists held right before they left on their march. The purpose of this document was to inform residents in Madison of the upcoming march, the reasoning behind it, and the anticipated series of events. We will now turn to an analysis of some elements of our primary source, starting by looking at key symbols. The article describes what protesters were carrying: an American flag, the Virgen de Guadalupe, and a sign with the Thunderbird of the National Farmworkers Association, also known as the NFWA. This organization later turned into the United Farmworkers Organization, which some of you might be familiar with. Salas built the march's credibility by connecting it to the NFWA, while the flag and the Virgen appealed to patriotism. Salas had heard of Cesar Chavez, one of the leaders of the NFWA, through a network of activists in Madison, and was inspired by him. Before the march, Salas reached out to Chavez for permission to use the Thunderbird symbol in exchange for supporting the NFWA's ongoing grape boycott. Chavez said yes, and so Wisconsin's Obreros Unidos movement became connected nationally. In terms of the Virgen and the flag, the article quotes Salas saying that the Virgen is, quote, not a symbol of naked Mexican nationalism. We are proud to be American citizens. All we want are the economic rights of other citizens. Salas intentionally portrays the march as a patriotic quest for basic rights to appeal to readers, while still maintaining cultural pride by carrying the Virgen. Through these symbols, the organizers send a clear message to the public. This march is both patriotic and connected to national movements. Salas and other protest leaders also tried to construct the narrative surrounding the protest to appeal to the public. In his autobiography, Salas recalls consulting his friend David Giffey prior to the march, worried about violent public backlash. Giffey's solution was to send a statement on the story to the Associated Press to make sure that the activists had some control over how their story was presented to the public. One of the newspapers who responded to the statement was the Capital Times, the publisher of our article. Our article briefly touches on the perspectives of growers, but it mainly focuses on the arguments of activists and their allies. For instance, it first quotes a heckler who says, quote, "These are the ones who never do any work. Why, if they wanted to work, they could earn $2 an hour." However, the newspaper then quotes another person who says, quote, "Why, those people are the most neglected in the state," and then goes on to talk about the lack of access to health care. The newspaper shows that farm workers' rights was a hotly debated topic and documents the arguments either side was making. That said, the paper overwhelmingly publishes the perspectives of protesters and their allies, probably because of Giffey's work, though it's worth noting that not all newspapers were as supportive. The effectiveness of Salas and his team's strategy is visible in this article, at least when appealing to Capital Times readers. So, when they arrived in Madison, migrants joined allies from the community at a rally at the Capitol building. According to historian Sergio Gonzalez, they succeeded in, quote, beginning a statewide conversation regarding the living and working conditions of Tejano workers. They also got two of their own on the Governor's Committee on Migratory Labor, which had been one of their goals, and the government officials agreed to investigate the unfair wages and poor working and living conditions. After the rally, though it proved to be challenging, different groups of farm workers went on to attempt to unionize. Overall, this strategically organized moment of activism tied into both national movements and made waves locally. And finally, if you're interested in learning more, here are some sources to look into. Thank you.